For this video, I'm just going to be showing my left hand. That's the most important thing for you to see. And we're looking at the D7, A7, and G7 chords, all of which are in your book. Remember, these are seventh chords, so pronounced D7, A7, and G7. For some reason, we call them seventh chords, not seven chords. But when we say the name of it, we don't call it D7th or A7th, we say D7 or A7. Not sure why that is, but that is how it is. So you should know that. We're going to start with the D7 chord, and we're going to start just by putting first finger on second string, first fret. Second finger is going to go on third string, second fret, and then third finger will go on first string, second fret. We're going to strum just 4 strings because we have an X over the 6th string and the 5th string. So that is the sound of our D7 chord. Seventh chords in general have a different sound than minor and major. We learned B7 already. They have what's called a dissonance or a clashing sound as opposed to consonant sound, consonants, I should say, like minor and major do. So we consider minor chords, A minor, for example, A major, while the minor is sad sounding or melancholy, and the major is happy or bright sounding. They are both what are considered to be consonant sounding, or they have consonants. And the seventh chords in general have some type of dissonance, and there are many types of seventh chords. The seventh chords in your book are only the type of seventh chord called a dominant seventh. And we will learn more about that later on. But for now, know that this is technically D dominant 7, A dominant 7, and G dominant 7. There are also such things as major 7th, minor 7th, and many more. Diminished, augmented, half diminished, etc. All right, so back to D7. Should sound like this. A7, let's look at next. Now, for the A7, your book, I believe, says to do 1 and 2. That's fine. The issue with this chord is that you do not want to block this third string. When I do this chord with 1 and 2, I am more likely to accidentally block that third string, which we need to be open sounding. So it's better for me to do 2 and 3. I prefer it this way. Then I can curve them more, and I'm not hitting that third string, which we need to ring open, because that is the sound of the 7th chord. That's the 7th note of the A scale, which is why we call it an A7 chord. If I block that note, it just sounds like a regular A major chord. So we need that. That's the dissonant note, which makes it a dominant 7th chord. So I prefer 2 and 3, but you can do 1 and 2. You could also do 1 and 3. You could do 1 and 4 I've seen. I've also seen 3 and 4. Any of these ways would be fine. As long as you get a clear sound, it really doesn't matter which way you do it. And again, with all chords, sometimes you might do a different fingering based on the song that you're playing for whatever chord comes before or after it. Okay, so the A7, one last thing, make sure you're not strumming that 6th string. We want just 5 strings on the A7. Make sure you can hear that third string open ringing clearly. Okay, lastly, we'll do the G7. G7 looks like this. You've got your first finger on the first string, first fret, second finger on 5th string, second fret, and third finger on 6th string, third fret. You're going to strum all 6 strings. And again, it has that dissonance. That's the note that should stand out to you, giving it the sound of the dominant 7th chord, which I describe as kind of playful, a little bit twangy. Depending on your musical experience, it might remind you of country music or maybe the Beatles, who used a lot of dominant seventh chords. However you want to remember it, but it does have a very specific sound, the seventh chord. All right, that's G7. You'll notice right away it has a similar shape to C major, but the fingers are just stretched out across all 6 strings for the G7. Make sure that you can hear this note when you're strumming. If that note is not ringing clearly, and you just hear that, but this is blocked, that I'm blocking that first string intentionally, then it's just going to sound like a G chord. We need to hear that for it to sound like a G7. Okay, which chord changes should you do? I'm just going to tell you, and I'll show you a little bit, and then you can practice these on your own. I definitely recommend practicing switching between C and G7 back and forth. You can do 4 strums each. This is a very common chord change in tens of thousands of songs, to go from C to G7. That would be a good one to change. D to A7. Now notice when I do D to A7, if I do the A7 with the fingering I like, which is 2 and 3, then I can use that third finger as my guide finger. I don't even have to lift it off the string. I can just slide it or guide it to the next chord shape. And the same goes going back to the D. I can slide that up, and I don't have to lift that third finger. That makes a smoother chord change. And then as far as the D7 goes, I would practice doing D7 to G. This is a very common chord change as well. So you would do D7, and then you would go to G major. Now, you may use a guide finger here as well, but only if you're doing the G with 1, 2, and 3. If you do it 2, 3, and 4, that won't work in that case. Okay, so if you want to do G to D7 and use the guide finger, you'll need to finger the G 1, 2, and 3 instead of 2, 3, 4. All right, we can start on either chord. Let's start on G this time. So G, all 6 strings. Then I go to the D7. Remember, just 4 strings for the D7. Back to the G. D7.